So as far as vegetable update for Northwest Ohio, probably one of the most pressing things was the storms we've had the last few nights. So night of August 23rd and August 24th last night, we just had really severe electrical storms in the region. The night of the 23rd, we got like 5 inches of rain in some spots within like a matter of hours. So yeah, honestly, kind of distressing weather, and seeing a lot of fields that are flooded, and we get an uptick in Phytophthora in some areas. So I just wanted to mention that. It's kind of spotty. The rainfall is kind of spotty in some parts of Northwest Ohio, but some areas really got hammered. As far as insects that I'm seeing, it's a lot of the same stuff. Definitely seeing some squash bugs on a lot of cucurbit plantings, particularly on like summer squash, zucchini, that sort of thing. But those are nearing their last harvest anyway, so growers aren't really applying or thinking about applying insecticides because they're almost done. As far as corn, sweet corn pests, so my traps corn earworm numbers are still quite low, and based on the recent corn newsletter that the agronomy team puts out, they're pretty low throughout Northwest Ohio. Although there's been some recent weather developments pushing sweet corn moths up north. So actually in Southwest Michigan, they've been catching like hundreds per week recently. So I'm not quite sure why they're fairly low yet in Northwest Ohio, Southeast Michigan, but just something to monitor. Sweet corn earworm, obviously a migratory pest, and it really depends on what the weather's cooking up, whether you get high population numbers.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah.
Can I just jump in there for a second and kind of make a comment that I think is really relevant? And that is, the moths can be here, but they won't be caught in the trap unless the trap is near silking corn. So if you've got a trap up and it's by corn that is already past or is pre-silking, you're not really going to catch that many. We've been catching here at the station about 200 plus or minus 100 every 2 days. And these traps are by silking corn. Before that, it was, 5, 10, 15. So, in about a week from now or 10 days from now, the numbers will go back down. And it's not because the flights have stopped. It's because the corn is not attractive. So that's a really big piece when you're monitoring, not just to have the trap out there, but the stage of the crop is very important. And what's green and fresh around the trap. That's really important.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, definitely an important point. So corn earworm, European corn borer, I'm still getting pretty low catches, just the same as it's been all season pretty much. Western bean cutworm has dropped off. I think that their population is kind of past peak flight and kind of tapering off. So I haven't been catching many now, and it doesn't look like in Northwest Ohio they've been getting high trap counts. Squash vine borer also tapered off. I haven't seen a ton of squash vine borer damage in cucurbit plantings this summer. So I'm debating whether I should be trapping for it next season or not. I know it's kind of a sporadic pest, and really mostly on small farms it's an issue. But again, it seems like that single population is nearing its end, so probably be taking my traps down fairly soon. So yeah, as far as insects, that's about it. Still seeing pretty much the same diseases on vegetables, downy mildew and powdery mildew on cucurbits, some Phytophthora. So nothing really new to report there. Processing tomato harvest is still going on. Some growers are thinking about what they're going to plant in their hoop houses for a winter crop. So nearing the end of the season here, I'll just close by sharing an upcoming event. So let me share my screen here. This is actually a Michigan State University Extension event, but it'll be in Monroe County. So we're hoping to get some growers from Northwest Ohio to attend, because Monroe is about 30 minutes north of Toledo and quite close to the Michigan-Ohio border. So this will be an event geared towards vegetable growers and field crop growers. Be focusing on issues like conservation tillage, specifically strip tillage, field drainage, and cover crop timing specifically. So we're gonna have some speakers come in for this evening field day event and hopefully have some demonstrations. And there'll be a catered dinner for folks. So our speakers, Matt Burkholder, he's actually a farmer down in Allen County, Ohio. He has a lot of expertise in no-till, cover cropping. He's a farmer advocate with the Nature Conservancy and runs his own farm. So quite a knowledgeable fellow. We're looking forward to having him. Dr. Dan Brainerd is an extension specialist from Michigan State University in the Department of Horticulture. Has a lot of experience with cover crops, mechanical weed control, reduced tillage, that sort of thing. For our drainage session, Dr. Asan Gane from Michigan State is going to be talking about water quality, field water management and drainage. He's a professor and extension specialist from the Ag and Biosystems Engineering Department. And for a cover crop session, we're going to have Madeline Solowski talk about cover crop timing. She's a conservation agronomy extension educator from Michigan State. She just started recently, and she has done a lot of research in the past on cover crops. And again, Matt will talk about his experience with cover crops there. So yeah, just wanted to make folks aware that this is open to Ohio growers as well. So I guess that's all I had to say about that. So that's pretty much all I have for an update. Does anybody have any questions? All right, so I think we'll move on now. Logan, thanks for being on the call today. Do you have an update for us?
The only kind of interesting thing I've run into this week, I'm seeing a few things here and there, as far like squash vine or seeing squash vine borer and squash bugs, of course, and my own stuff. I called out to a Mennonite grower over near Rainsboro, Highland County, the other day, and he had whole fields of big swaths of small cauliflower that were just dying at the root stones. So we picked up some samples, sent them in. It turned out it was a Rhizoctonia fungus that was killing them off. It's kind of an odd situation because he was getting it in one field that's been pretty continuous vegetable production for quite a while. But the place where we saw the worst damage was a field that had been fallow hay field for decades, and he hadn't had any kind of vegetables in there. He had tilled it, moldboard plowed it, tilled it pretty deep and everything else, and still was getting damaged. So kind of an interesting situation. Just something to kind of, I guess, watch. That's the main thing I noticed down here.
Yeah.
Yes, I took some pics, Jim. I saw your chat. Sorry.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see what the symptoms are there. Great, thanks, Logan, for that update. Let's hear from some of the county educators here. So yeah, Mark, what's going on in Hardin County?
Good morning. I'm going to share my screen. I had a call that came in. It was actually from Logan County. A grower is having an issue with asparagus plantings, and these asparagus are in their 4th year of growth. He sent me a couple pictures. This particular spear, he's wondering if it might be a product of herbicide drift. He said it was located about 50 feet from the highway where there was some spraying done, and he did have damage on a red bud tree, which is very sensitive to herbicides. Called out an ODA inspector, but just wondered if I could share these pictures with the fruit and vegetable specialist on the call to see if it might be something else going on, or whether it's maybe a growth regulator herbicide damage. This is the other picture that he sent. So I don't know if anybody has any comments on what could be causing this.
Yeah, it definitely does look like it could be a group 4 herbicide causing that twisting and distorted growth, especially on the fern. I know you can get kind of asparagus crooking when it's just the spears, and that can be like environmental issues. But I wouldn't think that would necessarily be affecting the fern, especially if they're spraying close. Yeah, I My best guess would be an auxin herbicide.
Along with that, as far as Hardin County goes, we too were affected by the heavy rains on August the 3rd. Our Cocoa Ross rainfall reporters recorded anywhere from 1.61 inches up to 3.44 inches that were recorded east of Kenton. So other than that, insect counts in my traps have been low all season. And this past week when I checked traps, all I could find were a couple European corn borers, and I'm in the process of switching out my Western bean cutworm traps with fall armyworm. So that's my report from Hardin County.
Excellent. Thanks, Mark. Did you guys get pretty high winds last night?
Not last night, did the night before. I don't
Sure.
recall getting them last night.
Southeast Michigan, it was up to 80 miles per hour in some spots, so quite dangerous. But thank you for that update. How about Presley? Do you have an update for us?
I do. So I had these pictures sent to me. Let's see. Of the tomatoes. And can you guys see the tomatoes? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So there's two pictures. Okay, there's the other one. And I said that they were stink bug damage, and it was sent to me from another extension office, and the lady that had sent it to me said that she had asked the grower and he isn't seeing any bugs or anything like that, and it's only on his tomatoes, and he was just adamant it was not stink bugs. So I was just curious if you guys thought maybe it was something else. I've tried to put a call into him, but I haven't been able to get through to ask any of my own questions, but just curious what you guys thought.
So I'll throw in my comment here. I completely agree with you. I think this looks like stink bug too, but it doesn't, I mean, he could have had tarnished plant bug, so it doesn't have to be stink bug. It could be other different types of true bugs or hemipterans, the kind of, you know, tarnished plant bugs or stink bugs, stuff like that could come in and cause this. But so I don't think like, oh, well, I never saw stink bug. That doesn't mean that other insects that are related can't cause similar injury, but I'll leave it to others if they have other comments.
I see that Jim put a question in the chat asking if the tissue below the tomato skin is like corky.
I don't know. Like I said, I haven't been able to get in contact with him to ask more questions. They were wondering though if it would affect, so they said that they were still eating it and wanted to know if it would affect like any canning, if they were to can the tomatoes.
Yes. So when you go to peel that, the skin is going to stick to, presumably when you carve right under the skin, there's going to be corky tissue there. It's going to stick to the skin and be difficult to peel. And you try to make sauce out of it, you're going to get these white, lumpy, corky bits in your sauce. So you can still eat it. It's still edible. It's just more of a like a physical defect more than anything else. But I'm with Ashley. I'm very confident it's a feeding pest. I've never seen tarnished plant bug injury, but it, you know, is the same kind of feeding mechanism. So it's, you know, likely the same thing. And it's really irrelevant which of the two necessarily, but I think the damage is consistent with those kinds of sucking pests.
Good question, Presley.
Other than that, we have just been dealing with all the rain. And that's pretty much it. Everything else was looking really good until the rain came.
Yeah, thank you for the update. Does anybody have any follow-up questions for Presley? All right, so we'll move on to Thomas. So Thomas, thanks for being on the call. What's happening in Lorain County?
Sure. So I guess I'll continue the broken record. Definitely we're dealing with the rain up in Lorain. Our fair actually closed yesterday because of flooding and trying to do some cleanup and get vehicles out of submerged water, or they were submerged underwater quite a ways actually in our parking area. So I checked on the Facebook page this morning, looked like our fair was open up today. So probably go in and make sure that it can help answer questions and keep things going there. Outside of our fair this week, not a lot of vegetable questions coming into the office. A few folks at the fair with some cucurbit questions. Squash and cucumber plants that have just kind of been wilting down. So was able to have the conversation with them about some of the different causes or potential causes for that. So talking about cucumber beetles and bacterial wilt, as well as squash vine borer as a potential cause, and got to talk about some of our diseases that we're seeing now as well, with downy and powdery being really prevalent right now. And then I'll also share my screen, and there we go. So the last 2 days, I got to do a lot of looking at spotted lanternfly. So Wednesday in Erie County, they were doing a delineation survey. So not too long ago, they found an infestation of spotted lanternfly in Erie County. So ODA wanted to come in and kind of do this delineation survey to get an extent of how far the infestation reaches from this initial point. So this is actually an image from, it's only about a mile, if that, from the Erie County Extension Office, right next to a railroad. And then this is on a tree of heaven. So that is their primary host. And this was probably the biggest patch on this tree, but I mean, they were all over this tree, and there were other smaller tree of heaven around it that it was really not very hard to find spotted lanternfly adults. So I went with a group and we headed out to Vermilion, and there was another group that headed out to Sandusky Bay, and then another group that was a little bit more central in Erie County. And I think we did wind up finding spotted lanternfly adults each place along the rail line that we were checking. So basically from west to east in Erie County, we've been finding them. And then that kind of matches up with what's going on in Lorain County as well. So this was one that we just found yesterday. There was a spotted lanternfly walkabout in Cleveland at the St. Joseph Cemetery. It was just an opportunity for us to get some master gardeners and industry professionals out there to learn what to look for when it comes to scouting for spotted lanternfly adults. And actually in Cleveland, we still had some fourth instar nymphs. But the other thing we wanted to check, so in Lorain, we already knew about infestations in Amherst and Elyria, but since we also found them in Vermilion right on the Erie-Lorain border, there was some more central locations we wanted to check with. So we also knew about a fruit farm pretty close to the tracks in the city of Lorain. So we went there yesterday to check and see if we could find anything, and we did wind up finding some adults. And this is on wild grapevine, which is another pretty common host plant that we've been finding them on. And interestingly enough, where we found this one, there was not any tree of heaven. So that was kind of unique for this location, that we were able to find quite a few adults without any tree of heaven being present. They were just mostly on the wild grapevine. So that was a good opportunity for us to, it was disappointing to find this, but to go and talk to this farmer that's only about a mile away from this infestation, to, kind of put him on high alert and make sure that he's really watching his crops to see if the adults are, going into next spring, if the nymphs are present. But I guess too, Ashley, maybe this is a question for you. We've kind of been telling people that the common host that we're concerned about the spotted lanternfly moving on to for fruit crops is obviously like grapevines, but then any fruit trees. So apples, peaches, pears, and this fruit farm in particular has a lot of small fruit, so mostly blueberries. And that was kind of a question he asked us was, will the spotted lanternfly be a concern on his blueberry crop?
Yeah, I mean, the evidence isn't supporting that they're going to be a major pest of blueberries. I would actually argue with people if they're saying that they're a major pest on tree fruit as well, that the evidence really hasn't been supported from
Okay.
Pennsylvania, which they grow a ton of apples. So you'll see these images of spotted lanternfly coating apples, and it looks really bad, but the reality is that might last a day or two, and then
Sure.
they're on to their next host because it's just not what they're looking for. Even with grapes, you have to have a really, really high infestation in order to see a negative effect, a yield decrease essentially. So I would argue at this point, what we know, I'm not going to say we know everything. Really, grapes are the ones that we need to be careful around, but also keep in mind that doesn't mean you see one spotted lanternfly in the vineyard and we need to spray it. It's not
Sure.
even to that level. So the other comment you made is important so Tree of Heaven is kind of seen to be a gateway colonizer, if you will. Like that's what enables colonization of this insect, seemingly more than anything else. But kind of coupled with that is wild grape. So they love those two. So Tree of Heaven, wild grape, those are great hosts for spotted lanternfly, in addition to a number of different landscape trees. So black walnut, for example, is a favorite as well. So just because you don't have Tree of Heaven in your backyard doesn't mean you're free of risk, if you will.
Sure. Yep. All right. Thank you. So I think that's all I have.
Yeah, good discussion. Thanks for sharing that, Thomas. So it seems like a pretty cool expedition you went on. So as far as other specialty crops, would hops be at high risk of spotted lanternfly feeding, or? Ashley?
Yeah, so the studies that have been done are minimal. I won't say that there have been studies that have looked at the impact of spotted lanternfly feeding on crop of hops, and it does look like there could potentially be a yield loss. But to be completely honest with you, there's just not enough data, I think, for me to say yes, this makes sense, because we're not seeing reports. Granted, it's not like Pennsylvania is a major hop producer, so we have to be careful with how much we can actually take from the mid-Atlantic and what they have experienced. But there has been a yield loss, but again, it was not a replicated trial that they've shown repeatedly that this is going to happen. So I'd be cautious with interpreting those results.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thanks, Thomas. Let's move on to your brother Frank. What's going on in Wayne County?
Yeah, it's been an interesting week. Overall, I think that the season has peaked. Visiting the produce auctions, both here north of Worcester and West Salem, and then down in Mount Hope, the auction floors are just jam packed. So we're really in the peak of the season. The additional moisture has provided some interesting challenges. We've honestly made it through a lot of the season without some disease challenges. That's been nice. Certainly dealing with some early pest pressures, but I'll share this image here. This was a watermelon that got brought into the auction, and you can see the lesions on that, and what stuck out to us was these circular lesions, which is very typical of Phytophthora blight on those watermelons. So the growers try to sneak a few of those into the bins and hope that they can move those through the auction, but they unfortunately get brought back to the auction. So the growers this year were thankful that they did not have to deal with Phytophthora early on, but especially where these farms are in the plain community where they're getting into produce, they'll till up a pasture for 6 or 7 years. It'll be great, no disease challenges, and then all of a sudden you have major disease issues. So I think that's what we're seeing with some of these growers, is that there's just enough disease pressure from lack of good crop rotation that they're starting to see some challenges. So aside from the Phytophthora, Chris, you mentioned, seeing a lot of squash bug nymphs. So a lot of those egg clusters have been hatching, and it just has been a really heavy week for young squash bugs. The brown marmorated stink bug traps I have out have caught a decent amount of brown marmorated stink bugs in orchard edges. I have seen an interesting amount of harlequin bugs, which I've never really seen this amount of harlequin bugs before. So every week I've caught probably about half a dozen harlequin bugs on my stink bug traps. So that's been kind of interesting. I've not seen that kind of population presence before. So that's kind of been what's happening with the stink bugs. I will say, in vegetable crops, this time of year I get a lot of complaints about, and I think Presley's picture did a good job of showing what happens especially when stink bugs get into high tunnels, tomatoes and peppers end up with a lot of those spots on them. And then, the reaction is, well, I've never seen them in there, but there certainly is ample opportunity for them to be in there, aside from the 10 minutes the grower spends in there, turning that irrigation on. So the other thing in high tunnels that we're kind of running into at this point is some leaf diseases, and especially in the high tunnel tomatoes. It's the time of year where humidity starts to build up in the high tunnels, and then we haven't really been pruning or training those crops to the best of the growers' ability maybe here, just with how busy they've been. So they kind of get left to grow a little wild, and so there's just a abundance of foliage and then some excess moisture. And so seeing some foliar diseases in the high tunnels, but with harvest winding down, I think some of the growers are okay to see some of those plants starting to work their way to the end of the season. So I think that's about all I've got from Wayne County. I guess the only other thing that we've seen kind of heavily here in the last couple of weeks is large animal damage in fall vine crops. I mean, the amount of deer and groundhog damage is frustrating, but I think that some of that has to do with field selection. Some of the fields that the growers are picking are just totally surrounded by trees and pretty isolated, so they're going to be full of groundhogs and deer. So we've got some growers dealing with that, but otherwise I think the pumpkin crop and fall vine crop looks really good this year. So I think that if we stay decent weather-wise, and I know a lot of my growers that kind of get nervous every time we get these strong storms because of the hail damage we had earlier, but I think that if we're able to make it through the fall here without any more significant weather, it should be a good crop of pumpkins and fall squash.
Thank you, Frank. Great update as always. Does anybody have any questions for Frank? All right, in the interest of time, we'll move along here. So Gigi, do you have an update for us?
No, I don't have anything for down here.
All right, thank you for being on the call today. Move on to our last few specialists. So Jim, do you have an update? Be away from his computer. How about Ashley? Oh wait, sorry. Go ahead, Jim.
I was trying to change the video settings so you could see this. So for those people that are saying that they don't have a lot of squash vine borer, I don't know who that was. We've had an epic level at the station. We saw it at the field day yesterday. And in 20 years of doing this, I've only seen fruit infested with squash vine borer one time. I randomly picked 30 fruit yesterday and found 3 squash vine borer caterpillars in there. So there's a huge amount here, which was great for teaching, although we didn't necessarily talk about it. We just sort of pointed it out casually. So their flights are pretty much over. I've been catching zeros the last couple of weeks. So the damage that's done was, back in the end of June and into July. We already talked about the corn earworm flights are really high right now here at the station, have been for the last couple of weeks. Silking is going on, so that's kind of the reason for that. We are having a lot of squash bugs in the fields. I think we saw those at the field day last night, and I don't know. I did take some pictures of some of the injury in case people aren't familiar with it. I could show you at some point in time, but it is what it is. We talked about field days. I want to make sure that we're aware that this Midwest Mechanical Field Day is going on. September 27 up at CFAS Worcester campus. We've got it's a multi-state thing, a lot of sort of people on the planning committee, kind of making final decisions. There will be the ability to volunteer there. Otherwise, the The rate for growers is $50 a piece. For educators, apparently Sarah is gonna pick up that tab of $50, so you can essentially go for free. But we will be needing some volunteers for that. And I think it's going to be a great program. It's, I think, the 4th or 5th year they've had it, first year here in Ohio. I just found out this morning that Scott Shearer is going to be bringing his autonomous Kubota tractor, which will be mowing some section of a field. So that'd be kind of cool to see that. The robots are taking over slowly and surely. So I think that's it. Stink bugs, we've got traps out at a couple locations, and seeing kind of an equal mix of nymphs and adults right now. Nothing too high. I suspect in the next couple of weeks when that migration happens, then we're going to pick up a lot of those. We are looking for melonworm in a couple spots across the state, which is a potential new sporadic pest in cucurbits. Haven't seen that yet. Ashley is helping with that. She hasn't seen it either, but keep an eye out for any weird looking damage on fruit. That'll be your first clue probably. I think that's it. So if there's anything else, people can let me know, but I think that's it for me.
Perfect, thank you. And I'd just like to echo what Jim had said about the Midwest Mechanical Cultivation Field Day. It was in Southwest Michigan last year, and just what a fantastic event, like really great discussion and demonstrations and just camaraderie between growers. So those are well worth attending. So let's move on to Ashley. Do you have an update for us?
I think that I'm probably going to end up echoing a lot of the comments that have already been said. So I mean, it's been kind of iffy with how certain insects have performed this past year, but overall, if I'm to characterize everything, it's been pretty good. We haven't had as much pressure with insects as we have, I think, in the past. So in the past 2 weeks-ish, we got a little bit of even more of a downtick in our thrips populations, downtick in aphids. Some of those can be impacted by weather events, so I'm not entirely surprised. But we have had an uptick in other insects like whiteflies. We've seen a lot more whiteflies in our cucurbit fields and a couple of our other solanaceous crops as well. An increase in mites as well, in addition to that, and that's a combination of if you get those hot, dry days, and later in the season, that's when we get these outbreaks, and they can be tricky to spot. And it's one of those things. I was chatting with a grower, and it was like, oh, that's what that was, when really it onset much earlier, but because it's sometimes easily kind of confused for other things, it can be difficult to actually track. Squash bugs, we've had an uptick, I guess, in that, but I would still say that we have not had squash bug, at least in northeastern Ohio, to the degree that we had them last year. So yeah, we're getting more of them in the fields, but they're super manageable, at least for us, and using our insecticide applications. General comment is that you might see more leaf hoppers on your crops because those will move with weather fronts. So there have been a couple of cases of some hopper burn on different commodities. That's not entirely surprising given some of these weather movements. As it relates to tree fruit, Frank can probably comment on this more than I can, but it sounds like our peaches are pretty much done. So even though we do have 3rd generation oriental fruit moth hitting the traps right now, we should be in a good spot because peaches are pretty much they're almost done harvesting. Coddling moth here in Worcester, we got our biofix about 10 days ago, so we're already finishing up with those coddling moth sprays here in Worcester. A little grape update as well. I did have a grower submit a sample of grape cane borer, which is actually assessed. It's a moth that's going to get into the canes. The issue with this is that the tactic that was really effective was Lorsban, and unfortunately we don't have Lorsban anymore, so that kind of limits our options. So if there are increased samples from grape growers about cane borer, that'd be really important for me to know because our options are pretty limited. So to things like parasitic nematodes, also weed management would also be something to look at. I thought Thomas did a really great job talking about spotted lanternfly, and that's just another thing that to keep in the forefront of growers' minds, just so that we have our eyes out. So another set of eyes, if they see something, definitely report it. It's going to only help us. Granted, as I mentioned earlier, the only place where we're going to see a really big impact in the fruit and veg world is really, I think, grapes. Maybe we might get some other impacts on vegetables in the future, but I can save that conversation for a later date. But I think that's it in terms of my kind of broad overview of what we're seeing bug-wise.
A question. Do you have any experience with pepper maggot? And if so, are there any insecticides you would recommend for that particular insect? There's a small grower that's having some issues with pepper fruit quality because of pepper maggot, and they were wondering if there was an insecticide that was sold in a small enough volume, or any insecticide that would be recommended for pepper maggot, or if row covers would do the trick.
Yeah, so I'll be completely honest, I don't have any experience with pepper maggot. The only like pepper maggot, I guess, that I've dealt with, or it's not even a maggot, would be like pepper weevil, or sometimes ECB can get into the fruit, but I don't have any specific options right now. But I can certainly reach out to you. I'd be happy to post something in the letter as well.
Okay, yeah, fantastic. I'd need to look into it a bit more too. Apparently it's related closely to apple maggot, but I've never really experienced it, so that'll be good to research. All right, does anybody else have any questions for Ashley before we move on? All right, Matt, do you have an update?
Yes, great conversation today. Thanks, everyone. So I would like to just spend a few minutes focused on something that I'm seeing more of in recent days and weeks, and might interest you as well. So this picture was taken, I hope you can see my screen. This picture was taken this morning here in Worcester. What you're seeing is a picture of a bunch of different potato varieties and experimental selections. And what I want you to see, each row, 30-foot section of row, and there are 3 across the field from the foreground to the background. So in this collection, you're seeing probably 1, 2, 3, 4, you're seeing about 12 different varieties or selections in the field of view. And what should jump out at you is that in this area, this particular line of variety still very much has its foliage. This one does as well. This one does. Obviously, this one does not. This one has intermediate. This one's intermediate. This one's dead back here. This one. So you're seeing this one is mature. So potato vines naturally senesce when they've reached their developmental stage, and that's really not the emphasis. The point that I want to emphasize so much is what we're seeing now due to the weather conditions as a result of something that did or did not happen 2 months ago, which is the hilling operation, which will affect crop quality, as I'll show you in the next slide. But before I move there, I'll just reiterate, Ohio does have a very interesting potato growing community. We have in the Scioto River Valley several thousand acres of potatoes being grown for chipstock, but across most of our counties, we have some potatoes being grown, particularly for special crop varieties for local markets, which is important in this next picture. When the vines develop, at first they're upright, and then they're procumbent, they open up, and so they flop, so to speak. And when they flop, that exposes the top of the hill that the potato seed was placed in. And if rainfall is excessive, like it is now, the hill can erode, and what that will do is expose the tubers, and then the tubers will start turning green, and then they're not marketable, and actually can make people sick if they consume that green portion. So the message here, for potatoes specifically, is make sure that the hills are hilling is appropriately done early in the season. I wrote a VegNet article on that topic because that will contribute to protecting the tubers after the vines fall, whether there is rain or not, because varieties differ and when they set potatoes, with the newest potatoes being set towards the top of the hill, meaning any sort of exposure will allow them to get green or be subjected to microbial breakdown or insect pest infestation. So this is a potato specific example, but as the caption reads in the lower left, I am personally seeing more quality issues and other types of issues associated with the excess rain that some areas are experiencing and the recent conditions. These issues range from delayed planting of the fall seeded, the mid-season seeded crops, whether they be rotation, green manure, or cash crops, to lower productivity, to disruptions in nutrient or fertility programs, to delayed harvest, to off quality. There's a cascade of issues that can develop given the weather patterns that we have been seeing through the season that can go unnoticed or underappreciated because well, we're chasing other problems, if you will, that might seem more substantial. So just a couple of words about using a potato specific example about the importance of proper hilling, the influence of variety maturity in that process, because of course the ones that you're seeing now that have their vines, those hills are still more intact because the canopy shields the hill, but also a general note of the kind of problems that can develop as a result of the weather conditions that we're having that truly do impact the bottom line. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Matt. It's a fantastic update and very effective in a slideshow format. Looks like Jim had a question in the chat. Where are potatoes mostly grown in Ohio?
So the biggest concentration of acreage is northwest and south central in the Souda River Valley, and then up northwest in and around well, just north and west of Bowling Green to Pemberville area. But the Souda River Valley has a concentration of acreage that is actually, to my understanding, Chris Brunis would know more, does know more. It's an Indiana-based farm that is farming in southern Ohio, and by the way, those potatoes are under center pivot irrigation, and they're probably in rotation with corn. And so far, the two entities involved are really liking the outcomes. Those potatoes are harvested and turned into potato chips. So, yeah, it's a very interesting development.
Certainly. Yeah, go ahead, Gigi.
Oh, I don't have anything. I didn't know I was unmuted. Sorry.
Sorry. So yeah, very interesting update, Matt. Thank you, and certainly important considerations for hilling and potatoes. So I'd just like to thank everybody for being on the call today and sharing your observations and information. It's very valuable and a lot of good ideas passed around today. So appreciate it very much.